So we are going to go over the process of photosynthesis. The number one thing that you need to keep in mind is that photosynthesis is the base for all living things on our planet. And it's actually the sun that is going to provide the energy for the process of photosynthesis. So obviously without the sun, we would not be able to have photosynthesis, and therefore life on our planet would not exist. So the key thing to keep in mind is the sun is the main source of energy for this process of photosynthesis. So almost all plants are photosynthetic autotrophs. There are some bacteria and some protists that are also photosynthetic autotrophs. So this brings us back to our ecology section. Photosynthetic, that's the process of making their food. And then autotrophs. Autotrophs are organisms that make their own food. So we want to remember those vocabulary words. So what happens is that the sun's energy is going to be transformed into an energy in the form of chemical bonds. And those chemical bonds are actually going to be sugars. The process of photosynthesis is really the process of making its food, and the food is going to be sugars. So what we're doing is we're taking inorganic material, meaning material that's not made of carbon, and we're turning it into a material that is made of carbon. So we're gonna see how plants actually take the sun's energy and then take other materials. They're gonna break apart the bonds and they're going to rearrange the bonds in order to make their sugars, their foods. So on this slide, I also have some pictures for you of some photosynthetic autotrophs, mosses, ferns, kelp, which grows in the waters, in the oceans. There are single-celled protists like the euglena here. That is a photosynthetic single-celled organism. And then there are bacteria. There's a picture here of cyanobacteria, which is a bacteria that does photosynthesis as well. So if you've never seen these things, I've provided some pictures here so that you could visualize and see some of these photosynthetic autotrophs besides just your basic plants that you see every day outside. So here's how the process works. The light energy from the sun is gathered by the plant. Carbon dioxide also gets taken in by the plant, as well as water. So our reactants, or our materials that have to go into the process, are going to be carbon dioxide, water, and light energy. From those three things, the plant is going to break apart the bonds that are between the carbons and the oxygens in carbon dioxide and between the hydrogens and the oxygens in the water. It's going to break those bonds apart, and it's going to basically rearrange the atoms, and it's going to make two new materials. So on the right side of the arrow here, that's going to be our products of the process of photosynthesis. So what comes out of the process of photosynthesis is going to be sugar, which is our C6H12O6. Our sugars come out. That's the food for the plant. We're also going to have oxygen come out. And a lot of people think that oxygen is just only a waste product for the plant, but the plant actually is going to keep some oxygen, because we're going to see later that the plant also does a process called cellular respiration. But for right now, it is a product of photosynthesis. Sometimes some water comes out as well, but water is mostly going in and is being used for the process of photosynthesis. But when it's really hot outside, we do get some water coming out because it's just so hot that the plant is releasing that water. So let's talk about why plants are green. When we see light, like the light coming from the classroom, the light is actually many different colors. So the visible light that we see is actually made up of purple and blues and yellows and oranges and reds. And you may have seen before when people put something like a prism out, we can actually make that light split into all the different colors. And so light is actually made up of all these different colors. So the light that's coming in from the sun is actually made up of all those different colors. You can see from the image here, we've got purple, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, all those colors coming in. And so the plant is absorbing those colors in order to get that energy. It's absorbing the energy of those colors. It's their wavelengths, waves of colors. And what actually happens is when we see something like the color green, that's the color that's not absorbed. That's the color that's actually reflected. So when we look at a plant and we see that it's green, that's because green is not being absorbed. So if you look at your shoulder partner and they're wearing the color red, That means that color is being reflected to your eyes, and that's why you're seeing the color red. All the other colors are being absorbed by that red sweater, the blues, the greens, the yellows, the oranges, but red is being reflected off. So take a look around the classroom and figure out, okay, what color is being reflected? The color you see is the color that's being reflected. All the other colors are being absorbed. So inside of a plant's cells are these little organelle pieces that we've started to talk about already. They're called a chloroplast. And those chloroplasts have pigment in them. Pigment is a color that is going to be absorbing the sun's energy. And so plant cells have green pigment in their chloroplasts. The pigment is actually called chlorophyll. And so these little green dots here, those are the chloroplasts that are going to be doing the process of photosynthesis. So when we look at a plant, the color that we see is actually the color of light that is not absorbed. So chloroplasts absorb the light energy. They're going to absorb, if you've got a green plant, it's going to absorb the red and the blues and the oranges. It's going to reflect the greens. All those energy light waves, it's going to convert into chemical energy. So that means that plants that are green are not going to grow very well under green light. So if you recall, when we did our bottle ecosystem, I said we couldn't use green bottles. Here's the reason why. If we put our plants into the green bottles, then only the green light is going to be coming through. And plants don't absorb green light. At least our plants that are green are not going to be absorbing the green light. They wouldn't have been able to get any of the sun's energy because all the light energy coming through the bottle would have been green energy only. All the rest of the colors would have been reflected, and the plant would not have been able to get the energy it needed. So let's review all of that. Photosynthesis is a process where the organism is taking the light energy and it's going to be making its sugar and oxygen from taking that light energy and carbon dioxide and water. So carbon dioxide goes into the plant, water goes into the plant. The molecules and the atoms that make up the carbon, the oxygen, the hydrogen, all those atoms are bonded together. They're going to break apart and they're going to rearrange and form into sugar and into oxygen. So carbon dioxide and water are going in. Those are called our reactants. Glucose and oxygen gas are coming out. Those are called our products. So where does this all happen at? Photosynthesis happens in the organelle called the chloroplasts, okay? All green parts of chloroplasts are going to carry out the photosynthesis. So leaves are going to have a lot of chloroplasts in their cells. The green color that a plant gets actually comes from a pigment, and that pigment is called chlorophyll. So what happens if our plant is not green? Basically, it still has chloroplasts, but the pigment that's in the chloroplast is a different kind of pigment. So for example, there's reds and greens and oranges. All of these are different pigments of colors. Orange is actually a pigment called carotene. Hence, carrots being orange, carotene is the pigment that's found there. So if a plant's not green, it just means it has different colors of pigments. Most of the plants we look at are green, so we mostly talk about chlorophyll as the pigment, the color of those chloroplasts, the color that's being reflected and not being absorbed as its energy source. So here I have some graphs for you to kind of show you that there are different pigments that absorb different colors. So you can see chlorophyll B is going to be absorbing colors that are in the wavelength of 500. Chlorophyll A is going to be absorbing wavelengths that are around the 700. Carotene, which is that orange one, they're going to be absorbing those orange colors, which are over in the wavelengths of 400 to 500. So the color is going to be the color that gets absorbed and the color versus the color that gets reflected. So different pigments absorb different colors of light. Let's talk a little bit more about this chloroplast. Here we have a chloroplast. And you can see it's a little bit more complicated. It's got an outer membrane, an inner membrane, and then there's these stacks, okay? These stacks are really part of where photosynthesis is going to be happening at. These are called thylakoids, okay? Thylakoids is one of the areas in the chloroplast where photosynthesis is going to occur. So I would circle, underline, make sure that you remember that word thylakoid. It's going to come back to us as we learn more about the process of photosynthesis. We're also going to learn about a part of photosynthesis that takes place also in the stroma. So we're going to see that word again too. So we're going to need to know the open spaces of the chloroplast called the stroma, and then we're going to need to know these like pancake-like stack areas called thylakoids, because different steps of photosynthesis are going to take place in these different parts of the chloroplast. So the first part of photosynthesis is where oxygen gas is going to be produced. Now this very first step is going to take place on those thylakoids, those pancake-like parts, the thylakoids that we saw in that previous picture. And so what happens is the plant is taking in the sun's energy and the plant is taking in water. And what it's gonna do is it's gonna take, water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen. And what it's gonna do is it's gonna take that water and it's gonna break it apart. It's gonna split it into separate pieces. It's gonna release the hydrogen, it's gonna release the oxygen. And oxygen gas is one of the things that gets released during this first step. This first step is called the light-dependent reaction because it needs light energy to go in order to get the process going. But basically what's going to happen in those little stacks of thylakoids, the water is going to go in, the light energy is going to go in, and out is going to come oxygen. So that's our first step of photosynthesis. So here's an overview to show you. So we just talked about the very first step, the light-dependent reaction. So we've got the water is going to go in and out is going to come oxygen. So the next step is going to be that we're going to need carbon dioxide to go in, and we're going to take that hydrogen and the oxygen and the carbon and the oxygen, and we're going to make glucose in that next step. So remember, the materials on the left side of the arrow are our reactants, what's going in. We need carbon dioxide, water, and sun's energy. And then everything that's on the right side of that arrow are going to be our products, our sugar and our oxygen. All right, so here we go. We're gonna put both of the pieces together. I talked about the light reaction happening in the thylakoid. So we've got our water going in, the water splits, oxygen gets made. That happens on those little pancake-like stacks, the thylakoid. The second step, which is on the right side of this image, the second step, we've got carbon dioxide going in, and we're gonna use that energy from the sun and from the first step, and we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna make the sugars. This is called the Kelvin cycle. Sometimes it's called the dark cycle. It's not that it only happens in the dark, it just doesn't require the sun's energy. So plants can do this step during nighttime when the sun is not up. So again, we've got two steps. On the left side, you can see water going in, being split, oxygen being produced. In the second step, our Kelvin cycle, or the light independent cycle, carbon dioxide is going in. We're gonna use some of that energy and we're gonna make that sugar. So C6H12O6, that's gonna be the sugar. That's basically the plant's food. We will watch this video by the Amoeba Sisters on photosynthesis in class together. So I know I've given you a lot of information today. We really want to take away from this an understanding of what material goes in and what materials come out during the process of photosynthesis. So the materials that have to go in for the process of photosynthesis, we're going to need sunlight, we are going to need carbon dioxide to go in, and we are going to need water to go in. So those are the three main things that need to go into the plant for the plant to be able to make its food. To make its food then, the products are gonna be sugar, which is C6H12O6. Basically, sugar is the plant's food. That's what it's making. And then the other product of photosynthesis is going to be oxygen, which is great for you and I so that we can do the process of cellular respiration. Now the plant is also gonna need oxygen because the plant is also gonna do cellular respiration, but we'll get to that at another time.